Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 656 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our ninth book just came out. It's called From Letters to Leaders, The Legacy of Service. So go and pick up that book on Amazon today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, we love having attorneys on the show because it's a world that college students really don't typically think about until it's too late. So let's get started with our next guest. Matthew Fornaro is a business law attorney with over 2 decades of service in South Florida who brings valuable, engaging conversation to audiences. Throughout his career, he has held the pleasure of guiding entrepreneurs and small business owners through both the practical and strategic aspects of building successful businesses, from entity formation and contract drafting to handling complex disputes and mentoring new professionals who are stepping into the world of business. As a proud graduate and instructor for entrepreneurship programs, and someone who has also offered pro bono work to veterans, he relates deeply to the sense of purpose and community that our listeners also embrace. His background as a law firm founder and his recognition with Marquis Who's Who in Forbes Magazine reflect a dedication to making the often intimidating world of business law approachable and relevant for people at any stage of purpose, like Greek life, professional growth, and networking as well. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Dr. Michael, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. What an intro.
Listen, I'm available. If you want me to introduce you on stages all across the country, just pack me away in your suitcase. I'm ready to go.
All right. I may have to cut and loop what you just said though. So
That's totally fine by me. So, I want to talk a little bit about your undergraduate background because our listeners always enjoy hearing about that decision-making process. And you decided on FAU for your undergraduate experience. I'm wondering, why did you choose FAU?
sure. So it's interesting because before we got on, we were just talking about my son who's out and about and my son's been independent and doesn't need us. And he's been pretty independent since he was 14. I was the complete opposite when I was his age. So, I was a pretty good student, had all AP classes, had, my big GPA, my SAT score, whatever. So I pretty much could have went to a lot of different places. However, I knew like when I was 18, I was not mature enough to go out on my own into the world. Like I could admit that to myself. So I knew I wanted to stay kind of close to home. So I'm here in South Florida. So I was looking at South Florida universities to stay close to home, and I picked FAU, which now is a top 100 public institution, a division or a tier one research. But back then, it was still maturing, up and coming. So I knew I always wanted to be an attorney. So I knew I was going to go to law school and I was going to go to graduate school. So I knew like I could go to, like the bigger school in the college town later on for graduate school. So that really wasn't like, oh, I'm going to miss my shot or whatever. So, I checked it out. I liked it. I went there. I did pretty well. I graduated in 3 years. I graduated with honors. I was in the honors program. I did a bunch of stuff. I was a student senator, did a bunch of extracurricular stuff that probably helped me pretty well get into the law school I wanted to get into. And that's how I picked FAU and I liked it. And I've been a supporter ever since. And it's cool to see how much it's grown, not just in size, but in, gravitas and whatever else you want to call it over the last, 20, well, I graduated 27 years ago now. So the last 27 years is cool to see its endowment is huge now. It's cool to see it go to be a Carnegie Division One research. And it's cool to see the athletics program get so huge. They went to the Final Four 2 years ago and, all the other stuff that went with it.
Yeah. That degree is definitely worth more now than it was back then.
Yeah,
So you're doing well. I think that was a wise investment. You got in early at FAU, which is fantastic.
yeah, exactly. Always better to be in the ascendancy of a civilization than the decline.
There
So,
you go. There you go. For sure, you're ascending. No question about that. And you spent more than 2 decades practicing business law in South Florida. I'm wondering what inspired you to be an attorney?
sure. So, growing up, I always liked watching like the People's Court and like other like reality based kind of TV shows like that from the 80s and the 90s. And so I was always kind of into that. I was just kind of into the law, but I wasn't like into like the LA law or law and order stuff. I was like into more like the real life, like helping people solve disputes and things like that. So that's kind of what got me on the track to always kind of know I wanted to go to law school and being an attorney. So it's not like a great like Clarence Darrow moment or like an Abraham Lincoln moment, but it's like it's like a Judge Wapner moment. So
Yeah. Well, fun fact, Judge Judy lived across the street from my house when I was growing up as a kid. Just want you to know that.
yeah, I actually, believe it or not, when I had to go, I was in LA and I was on a tour of Beverly Hills. I actually saw Judge Judy's penthouse in Beverly Hills, and I'm like, Judge Judy, there she is.
Yeah, she
So
did very, very well in life.
yeah,
I think her original, her upbringing was not quite so luxurious. Let's just put it that
yeah,
way.
yeah,
But obviously very successful in the 80s and 90s, and even still to this day.
yeah.
So she's had an incredible career. Now, many college students who are listening right now, they dream about starting a business. There's a lot of Gen Z folks that have these ideas about a new business or a new service that they want to build. So, what legal steps should they be taking before launching their first venture?
Sure. So, the thing with entrepreneurs, founders, startups is that a lot of them always, just jump right into business and don't do like the due diligence or the planning, particularly the very young entrepreneurs, like people who are just out of college, have like a tech idea or something. So, the first thing that they have to realize is I know you have a great idea. I know you're going to make a lot of money or whatever. You got to slow down first. You got to plan it out because if you jump in and if you're unsuccessful or if you're successful even you're going to have problems. So one of the best things that I can say is you got to use due diligence. So before you even start a business, you need to reach out to professionals who help you with your business, like me, a business law attorney, an accountant, a commercial banker, professionals in the space that you're going to be in, like if, whatever else. And then obviously another thing you need to do is, before you get into business, meet with them and figure out what kind of business is best for you based on your circumstances and what kind of business organization. Then once you figure that out, you have to have a written business plan to talk about your business, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of your business before you even start. So that way you have your roadmap of what you're going to do. And then when you take that step, and then once you meet with your professionals, then you pick your business organization, you register it, and then you make sure you have your governing documents in place, which is just as important as the written business plan. So if you have an LLC, you have to have an operating agreement. If you have a corporation, you have to have bylaws or articles of incorporation to make sure they're all in place. And then obviously, you incorporate or you found your LLC or whatever, and then you get started. And then, then you actually start your business at that point. So you got to do all that due diligence before you go on to, here in Florida, sunbiz.org or wherever else you are, your Secretary of State website and pay like the 50 or $100 to sign up. It's a lot more in depth than that. So it's my advice to the college kids out there or any entrepreneurs. It's just, do your due diligence and plan ahead. I mean, you can move at a rapid pace, but don't, just jump right in blindly and do whatever.
Mhm. All right, so let's assume you've done your due diligence. You start this new company. Let's say you're an S corp or something like that, because that's what Greek University is. What are some of the big legal mistakes that you see young entrepreneurs make in their first year of business?
Sure. So, it goes back to a little bit what I just told you about having like, trusted professionals around you who you can ask advice from and, get guidance from. You're not as much as you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, whatever, you're not in it alone. You have professionals who can help you make good business decisions because the whole point is that you want to be making business decisions. You don't want to be making like legal decisions because that's for your attorney or accounting decisions because that's for your accountant. So a lot of entrepreneurs try to do it too much themselves and they don't need to. They can rely on professionals. And then another thing they do also is that they try, and I understand, budgeting and time is an issue, but they wear too many hats and it distracts from them actually doing business stuff because they're also, doing their website, their SEO, their whatever. And, that's all stuff that you need to be willing to delegate out because it's going to turn out better for you in the long run than if you're trying to do it yourself. So that's probably a big mistake I see a lot of people doing. And another thing too is, you got to run everything, pursuant to the law and as formally as possible. It's not a hobby. It's not a side hustle. I mean, if it's a business, it's got to be run professionally. So you got to comply with all the rules. You have to have a separate bank account. You have to have a separate identity for the business. You can't commingle funds. You can't, do things one way one day and do things another the next day. You got to do everything uniformly and objectively. And, a lot of people just kind of, sometimes cut corners or whatever, and they don't do what's required. And that's probably another issue too.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Delegate as much as possible in the beginning. I think the one downside is a lot of people are working on the shoestring budget. And so that's part of the issue is they don't have unlimited funds to delegate everything that they want to delegate. So they end up taking on things that they're really not experts in. And I
Hmm.
think the law is certainly one area, accounting is another area, maybe the website and search engine optimization. Those are all areas where if you can, outsource it because there's other people that know how to do these things much better than you do, and they can save you a lot of time and energy on the back end just by doing it right on the front end.
Yeah.
So there you go. Now we know that famously people get into disputes all the time, and you specialize in commercial litigation. So what are some of the most common types of business disputes that you see?
Sure. So, a lot of everything just involves around issues related to contracts and disputes with contracts, whether it's internal within the business or external outside of the business. So, a lot of the things are, you start a business with your friend or family or whatever, and then you get in a dispute with your co-founder or whatever. So it's always like a business divorce. That's a classic example of, I hate you, I can't stand you anymore, I want to get rid of you, I'm great, you're not, that kind of thing. So internal business strife, always a huge issue. Breach of contract with another business or another individual, another huge issue. You owe them money, they owe you money. They didn't comply with your contract, you didn't comply with their contract. Just the classic stuff like that, and other things are, former employees, they're owed money or they think they're owed money. They come and sue you for unpaid wages or, things like that. And just classic stuff related to all the machinations of the business and around the various contracts and relationships that you have within the business and outside the business.
Okay. So I have an accounting background. I'm certainly not a lawyer, never went to law school. So for somebody who's not a lawyer, give us maybe three things that we should always be looking for before we sign a contract.
Sure. So, A, you always want to make sure there is a contract. A lot of people in a lot of businesses just kind of skip over having a contract and just kind of, do services or provide goods and then, send an invoice or, do something on the internet or whatever. So that's not good. You always want to make sure you have a contract anytime you have a relationship with your business and another business or another person, regardless of what it is. You want a contract to govern it. So the first thing is you want a contract. And the second thing in a contract is you want to make sure that, I mean, you could have a one-page contract that's great, and you can have a 50-page contract that's terrible. You just want to make sure all the terms that you need are in there. So, it explains the relationship between the parties. It explains who does what. It explains, who gets paid, when they get paid, how they get paid. And then, if there's an issue, it explains how the issue is resolved. If it's a lawsuit, it says where the lawsuit takes place. It has an attorney's fee provision that says that the prevailing party recovers their attorney's fees and costs. And then obviously has a venue provision where hopefully it's where you are, not some crazy venue somewhere else. So those are, generally the things you want to look for in any contract. It's just, the base. I mean, it's not really that complex and that arduous, and doesn't have to be a big contract. It can, like I said, it can be a one-page contract. As long as it says what needs to be said in it and has that stuff in it, that's all you need.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I believe in that as well. I don't really see the need for a 50-page contract with my clients. I have a one-page contract with the universities that I do business with. It's very simple. There's not a lot of legal jargon that's on there. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been successful is because, people's eyes glaze over when they see a 50-page contract. They're like, what are we doing here? Right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's very simple. I'm providing a service for this amount on this day at this location. And it can be very simple, so I never really understood why some of my competitors, they have very lengthy contracts. And I'm just like, nobody wants to sign that
Yeah, exactly.
or
I
has the
mean,
time to read through it, to be quite honest.
yeah, and I mean, after a while, it's just redundant and whatever. I mean, there's some, a lot of the deals or whatever I work on, the contracts are huge. And like, yeah, I understand, like, there's like financing and all kinds of stuff like that. But for, your run-of-the-mill service contracts or whatever, I mean, they don't have to be long. They just have to, like I said, say what the relationship is and have the provisions in there, and it's fine.
Yeah. Now, you've been a successful entrepreneur. I've been a successful entrepreneur. And, there's probably things that come in handy as an entrepreneur. So, what skills do you think that college students should be developing right now if they want to be successful as entrepreneurs after graduation?
Sure. So, I mean, you have to always be learning. So it just doesn't stop once you get a degree. I mean, you always seek out knowledge in whatever form it is. You always be willing to listen to people, not just talk. You have to listen and hear what people say. Sometimes what they say is crazy, sometimes what they say is correct. So you never know which is going to be which. So you got to listen and be patient. And then, you're not always right, even though you think you are when you were a kid, because you're very powerful. Sometimes you're wrong. You have to understand that. And, you have to understand personal accountability. I mean, you're not a kid anymore. And when you graduate college, you're really not a kid anymore. And the buck stops with you. So you have to take personal responsibility over everything that happens. And, I mean, if something goes wrong or whatever, you can't just blame it on someone else. You have to look introspectively and say, what could you have done differently, or what, could have happened different, and always be willing to, compromise and change.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think being a lifelong learner has really, really helped me quite a bit over time. I continue to learn. Just got my doctorate last year. So, I mean, you can still do this stuff when you're 50 and
Yeah,
beyond. Okay.
yeah,
So keep learning. I think that is a really good mantra for anybody who's listening.
no.
So, I'm assuming you've built a successful business, and I believe that nobody really builds successful businesses all by themselves. I think that one of the keys to success, for me anyway, is finding the right mentors. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? What role mentorship has played in your own career? And also, how can young professionals, somebody like your son as an example, how can they find the right mentors in life?
Sure. So, I think it goes back to the whole, never stop learning thing. I mean, one of the best ways to learn anything is from someone else to practically show it to you. So, I mean, throughout my career, or my first boss at my first law firm, when I started out doing commercial litigation in Boca Raton, is still my friend 20 plus years later. I mean, I was actually on the phone with him before I signed on here because we were talking about a case where I need him to be my expert witness for attorney's fees. And so, I mean, he's helped me throughout my career from a legal standpoint, from a business standpoint. I was a political science undergrad major and a communications minor. So I had like no business acumen and no business education whatsoever. So those are things I learned after I was an attorney and after I went out on my own and started my own law firm. And, I sought out, like I said, sought out the knowledge and found people to help me through this thing called the, uh, the Kaufman Foundation. The Fast Track program was one thing. And another thing was the Jim Moran Institute from Florida State University, which went out, found great people to give me like the business instruction that I needed, been in touch with them. I'm actually an instructor now for both programs. So I go back and teach the business law component. And then, just other mentors who, people who are in business, maybe your competitors or whatever, which, it's always fun to talk to a colleague and trade war stories and talk about things or whatever from, from a attorney standpoint and then from a business standpoint. I mean, you just talk to like my clients who are successful business people, a lot of them just ask them about business stuff or whatever. And for, the new graduates out there or the college kids. I mean, to find a mentor or whatever, you don't have to, go out and be like, I need a mentor or whatever. Just ask people who are in the industry you want to be in or in the practice you want to be in, or even people who are successful business people. Just ask them questions. I mean, most people generally want to help other people. I mean, some people don't, but whatever. But most people generally want to help, particularly younger people or new people to the professional world or whatever. So just ask questions and, they'll give you their answers. I mean, that may be the right answer or not, but, just don't be afraid to ask people questions and don't be afraid to follow up with them because, like I said, most people want to help, particularly younger people. So you don't have to go out on a quest to find like a mentor or whatever. Just find someone who's successful or someone who's been around for a while and just ask them questions.
I totally agree. And even competitors will help you. I think there's enough business for everybody. And I'm sure you've run into situations where you can't take a particular client. It could be a conflict or something like that. And you end up sending it to a competitor and vice versa. So those situations happen all of the time. What is a legal lesson that you wish every college graduate understood before they become professionals?
A legal lesson is that just be wary of all the contracts that you sign when they put in front of you, like the things I said before. Make sure that stuff's in there and make sure certain stuff isn't in there. So you're responsible for what you sign, whether you read it or not. That's the law.
There
So
you
you
go.
gotta you're as part of your accountability and part of your being an adult and whatever, you got to make sure you're aware of what it is you're entering into.
Totally agree, right? Whether you read it or not, if you signed on the bottom line, you're responsible for it.
Mhm.
So make sure you either understand the contract or you have a good attorney that can look that over to kind of let you know what pitfalls might be there. Can you tell us what is the most fascinating or maybe just the most unexpected case that you've ever worked on?
You know, After 20 years, I've been involved with some really, really weird stuff. I mean, really weird stuff. Just stuff that, now I take it for granted, but it was so bizarre that it was just, I don't even know. I mean, I've been involved in, you know, it's just so many things, there's too many things to say. I've been involved in a lot of times where back when I used to work for my old boss, who I was telling you about, who's, I was in contact with, we did a lot of commercial real estate stuff. So we represented one of the biggest private property owners in South Florida, and he had thousands of properties. So there'd be all kinds of contract issues and whatever, where we'd have to sue like his tenants or whatever. And we wound up taking over a lot of businesses where we would have to show up with the sheriff to, turn over the business possession. So I wound up, I've seen restaurants get cleared out by sheriffs at high lunchtime saying, get out, the landlord's taking over the property, and the people don't know what the hell's going on. They just scramble, taking over health spas, ever just crazy stuff of just assuming someone else's business. So that would probably be something crazy is that you walk in and it's one person's business 1 minute and then legally it switches over to someone else's the next minute, and even if the customers are there. So that's probably something unique that I took for granted, but it's pretty interesting in retrospect.
For sure. Now, I do love good food, so I'm wondering the next time I end up in Miami or Fort Lauderdale, where should I go for a great bite to eat? I think you know good food.
I know good food. Being Italian, I'm a good food expert. The problem is that South Florida is so big. There's so much good food everywhere. So, I'll do one for each county. I'll do one for Miami-Dade, one for Broward. All right. So, gotta stick with seafood-ish theme because you're on the coast. So obviously, Miami-Dade, you gotta go to Joe Stone Crabs.
Nice.
If you've never been there, I mean, that's the default. Everyone in the world goes to Joe Stone Crab, so you can't go wrong there. For Broward, I'm going to tell you an interesting place that is like the oldest restaurant in Broward County is called Cap's Place, and it's from the 1920s, and it's actually on the barrier, what normal people call the barrier island. So you have to take a boat to get there.
Mhm.
You can't just drive there. And it's a seafood place that's like 100 years old that everyone's been to for years. And it's great seafood or whatever, but it's very rustic and very off the beaten path. And it used to be like Al Capone used to hang out there when he lived in South Florida. So it's very interesting, good seafood. So those would be my two picks for you where you're not going to get that anywhere else. Would be some good seafood stuff.
That
So
sounds delicious. And as a guy who lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and is totally landlocked, I definitely appreciate the seafood options
yeah,
because that's where I'm going.
yeah. There's lots
But
of places. I could have said lots of Argentinian, Brazilian steakhouse. We got all that stuff is good, but I went with two locals places for it.
I love it. All right. So if our listeners, if they want to reach you for legal advice or they have questions regarding contracts, maybe a dispute that they're under and they need some help, where should they go to connect with you?
Sure. You just go to my website, which is fornarolegal.com, which is my last name, Fornaro legal.com. And it's got all my contact information, all my social media, all my blogs, all my white papers, all my podcasts that I've been on. It's got a ton of information that you can pretty much figure out if you have a business question. A lot of it's just search my blogs and search my things. And if you can't find the answer, just shoot me an email or give me a call.
Sounds good. Matthew, thank you so much for just helping out here. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, if you learned something from Matthew today, please share this episode with your chapter, drop a link in a group chat, share it on social media. You never know who needs to hear Matthew's message today. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Bye for now.